Real English for your daily life.
Master English together.
You downloaded the new app. You bought the pretty notebook. You watched every single Change Your Life in 30 Days video you could find. And 2 weeks later, you're doing exactly what you were doing before.
Oh, that is painfully specific. That's not just a habit. That's a whole identity crisis in slow motion.
And here's the thing. It's not because you're lazy. It's not because you picked the wrong method. It's because your brain has a secret undo button. And it hits it every single time.
This is a B1 level episode. So if you're an intermediate learner, you're in exactly the right place. Beginners, you're welcome here too. We'll keep it clear and real.
Today we're talking about why your brain keeps pulling you back, even when you desperately want to change. And there's one thing we discovered that most people completely miss.
The problem isn't your strategy. The problem is something called cognitive inertia. And your brain is running it on autopilot right now, without telling you.
Quick question. Before we dive in, and we want a fast answer, okay? Think about the last time you tried to change a habit or start something new. How many days did it last? Drop a number. 3, 7, 12, tell us.
My personal record is 4 days. 4. I'm not proud of it.
Honestly, same. But that number, whatever yours is, it's not a failure. It's actually data. And today, we're going to show you what that data means.
Stay with us until the very end, because we've got our word tour coming. 5 powerful expressions that'll help you talk about your brain, your habits, and your growth in real natural English.
We're going to cover why your brain defaults back to old patterns, what neuroscience actually says about real change, and 2 zero-pressure exercises you can start today, not tomorrow. Today.
And later, we'll give you one tiny shift that makes everything easier. But first, Sara, let's get into the story, because this one hits close to home.
It really does. We're going to talk about what it actually feels like to be stuck, and why being stuck isn't the problem you think it is. Okay, so I want to start with someone I know. Her name's Mia. And before you ask, yes, she gave me permission to talk about this.
Tell us about Mia.
Mia's the kind of person who tries really, really hard. She's not someone who gives up easily. She's read the books, she's taken the courses, she's made the vision boards, and every single time she'd start strong, like genuinely strong, and then somewhere around week 2 or 3, she'd just drift back.
Back to what, exactly?
Back to scrolling at midnight instead of sleeping. Back to cramming the night before instead of studying consistently. Back to saying, I'll start Monday, every Monday for months.
That's not laziness. That sounds exhausting, actually.
It was. And the worst part? Mia thought it was a discipline problem. She kept telling herself, I just need more willpower. I just need a better system. So she'd find a new app, a new planner, a new YouTube channel with a new productivity guru.
And then 2 weeks later,
right back to square one. And she started to feel something really heavy. This creeping thought that maybe she just wasn't the kind of person who could change. That some people are built for growth and she wasn't one of them.
that's such a dangerous place to be. Because once you believe that, every new attempt just confirms it.
Exactly. And that's where cognitive inertia comes in. Because what Mia was experiencing wasn't a character flaw. It was her brain doing exactly what it was designed to do. Protect her by keeping her in a familiar, predictable state.
So let's break this down. Cognitive inertia. What actually is it?
Think of your brain like a hiking trail through a forest. Every time you do something, a habit, a thought pattern, a routine, you're walking that trail, and the more you walk it, the clearer and easier that path gets. The grass flattens, the mud dries, it becomes the obvious route.
So it's a path of least resistance.
Exactly. And here's the thing, when you decide to change, you're not just choosing a new trail. You're trying to walk through tall grass in the dark with no map. Your brain looks at that and says, "Why? We have a perfectly good trail right here."
That is such a good image. No wonder it feels so hard.
And this is what scientists mean when they talk about your brain's default mode. It's the automatic setting, the path it returns to when you're not actively overriding it. And most of the time, we don't even notice it's happening, which is exactly why it's so powerful.
So Mia wasn't failing because she lacked effort. She was failing because she didn't know her brain had this default mode pulling her back every single time.
And she wasn't alone in that. Most people are completely stuck in a rut without realizing that the rut itself is a neurological structure, not a personal flaw.
Okay, so here's what I want to push on. Because there's this popular idea, just build better habits. We've all heard it. Atomic habits, habit stacking, the 2-minute rule, and those are genuinely good ideas. But if the brain's default mode is this powerful, do better systems even matter?
That's such a real question. And the honest answer is, systems matter, but only if you address what's underneath them. Here's why. When you adopt a new system without understanding your default mode, you're painting over rust. It looks better for a while, but the rust is still there.
Painting over rust. That's exactly what it is.
What Mia eventually realized, and this took her a long time, is that before she could rewire her behavior, she had to understand the wiring. She had to learn to see when her brain was slipping into autopilot. Not judge it, not fight it, just see it.
And that sounds simple, but it's actually not. Because when you're in the middle of it, it doesn't feel like autopilot. It feels like a decision you're making.
Yes, that's the most disorienting part. You think you're choosing to scroll for just 5 minutes. You think you're choosing to skip the gym just this once. But your brain has already made the decision before your conscious mind caught up.
So the moment you think you're choosing, you've actually already been chosen by your default mode.
That is a beautiful and slightly terrifying way to put it. And it's also why the first step to any real change isn't a new habit. It's a new kind of awareness. You have to learn to catch yourself before the automatic loop closes.
So what did Mia do when she finally understood this?
She stopped trying to break the pattern by force. That was the shift. Instead of trying to overpower her default mode, she started working with her brain's architecture, not against it.
How?
She started small, almost embarrassingly small. She stopped asking, "How do I completely transform my study habits?" and started asking, "What is one tiny thing I can do differently right now that feels almost too easy?"
Almost too easy. I love that. Because too easy is basically brain safe, right? The brain doesn't trigger the alarm bells.
Exactly. And when the brain doesn't feel threatened, it's much more open to letting you shift your perspective on what's possible. That's when the real rewiring begins. Not with a dramatic overhaul, but with a tiny interruption of the automatic loop.
So instead of trying to build a whole new trail all at once, you just take one step off the old one.
One step, and then another, and gradually you start to break the pattern, not by force, but by consistency. That's the part most people skip because it's not Instagram worthy. It's not a transformation montage. It's just quietly, patiently choosing differently one small moment at a time.
That actually makes me feel a lot better about my 4-day record.
It should, because those 4 days weren't a failure. They were 4 steps off the old trail. And they count.
And by the way, there's a phrase for this feeling of being trapped by your own patterns. It's called being stuck in a rut. We'll break it all the way down in our word tour later, including rewire, default mode, and more. So stay with us.
And in the next part, we're going to talk about what you can actually do. The 2 exercises that are almost too small to feel real, but are backed by some genuinely fascinating neuroscience. So we talked about cognitive inertia, and we talked about Mia, but now I want to get into the actual tools, the 2 practices that can genuinely start to loosen that default mode grip.
And I want to hear them. And I mean this seriously, I have a real concern. Because I've heard this kind of thing before. Small steps, tiny habits. Be gentle with yourself. And every time it sounds beautiful. But then nothing actually changes.
That's a fair pushback. Say more.
Here's my issue. If cognitive inertia is a neurological structure, if it's literally baked into how the brain works, then how does switching your route to work or brushing your teeth with your other hand actually do anything? That feels like putting a bandage on a broken leg.
I hear you, and I'd push back on the analogy actually. Because a broken leg is structural damage, it needs external intervention to heal. But cognitive inertia isn't damage, it's a groove. And grooves can be loosened by consistent, low-level friction.
Okay, but can they really? Because there's research showing that habit formation takes anywhere from 18 days to 254 days, depending on the person and the behavior. That's a massive range. What if the tiny interruption approach only works for people who are already neurologically flexible?
That's actually a really important point. And you're right, the range is huge. But here's what that research also shows. The people on the shorter end of that range weren't more disciplined. They were more willing to shift their perspective on what progress looked like. They didn't wait for a dramatic transformation. They accepted tiny evidence of change.
But isn't that just lowering the bar? If you celebrate brushing your teeth with your left hand, aren't you just tricking yourself into feeling good about something that doesn't actually matter?
No, and this is the key distinction. You're not celebrating the action. You're training the noticing. When you deliberately do something differently, even something tiny, you're practicing the act of stepping out of autopilot. You're building the neural muscle for interruption itself. And that muscle is exactly what you need to break the pattern in bigger areas of your life.
Okay, I'll sit with that. But here's my third concern. This approach assumes that people have the self-awareness to notice when they're in default mode. But what if they don't? What if the whole problem is that they can't see it?
Right. And that's precisely why the first exercise isn't about doing something differently. It's about seeing something differently. It's called perspective rotation, and it's specifically designed for people who feel completely stuck in their own point of view.
Okay, tell me exactly how it works.
So here's the practice. Next time you hit a problem you keep circling around, a decision you can't make, a habit you keep breaking, a goal that keeps slipping, you stop and you force yourself to look at it from 3 angles. First, as yourself. Second, as a neutral observer, someone who has no emotional stake in the outcome. And third, as your own critic, someone who genuinely disagrees with your current approach.
And you only spend 90 seconds on each one?
90 seconds. That's it. Because the goal isn't to solve the problem from those angles. The goal is to realize that your current perspective is just one option among many, and the moment you realize that, your brain's grip on the default mode loosens, just slightly.
So it's less about getting the right answer and more about reminding your brain that other answers exist.
Exactly. You're not rewiring in one session. You're just introducing doubt into the automatic loop. Healthy doubt, the kind that creates space for something new.
And the second exercise?
It's called comfortable discomfort, and the name is intentional. Each week, you pick one small thing, genuinely small, and you do it in a way that's unfamiliar. Take a different route, eat lunch in a different order, reorganize one drawer, write one sentence in a way that feels awkward and wrong to you.
Write one sentence badly. That's an exercise?
Yes, because for a lot of us, especially learners who are perfectionists, the automatic loop is about avoiding discomfort. Every time we feel slightly off balance, the brain snaps back to safety. Comfortable discomfort trains you to tolerate that off-balance feeling in a low-stakes context, so that when it matters, you don't immediately retreat.
So you're building discomfort tolerance the same way you'd build a muscle, by using it in small doses before you need it in big ones.
Yes, and together, these two practices do something that no productivity system can do on its own. They don't just change what you do, they start to change how your brain decides what's possible. And that is where real change lies.
I came in skeptical. I'm leaving with homework.
That's all I wanted, and if you want to share which exercise you're going to try, we genuinely love to hear it.
Okay, so we've talked about cognitive inertia, Mia's story, and two genuinely powerful practices. That was a lot. In the best possible way.
And now it's time for our word tour. These are the 5 expressions we've been weaving through today's conversation. Words that'll help you talk about your brain, your patterns, and your growth in real, natural English.
Let's break them down, one by one.
So, let's go back into Mia's week for a second. Because the phrases make so much more sense when you hear them in the story again.
Right, and I love that we didn't just drop these words into a list. We watched them live in the story first, which is exactly why they stick.
When Mia said she felt stuck in a rut, she wasn't talking about one bad morning. She meant the same loop, over and over. Work, guilt, repeat.
And that phrase sounds very visual to me. A rut is like a groove in the road. So if you're stuck in a rut, you keep rolling into the same place without trying.
Exactly, and that's why people use it for habits, moods, even relationships. You can feel stuck in a rut at work, in your studies, or in a boring routine that never really changes.
I've definitely had that feeling on a Sunday night. Same snacks, same playlist, same panic.
Same, and when we talked about not taking the first thought as the final truth, that's where shift your perspective came in.
That one is beautiful because it's so active. You're not just thinking differently in some vague way. You're literally choosing another angle.
Right. If you shift your perspective, you might ask, what would my friend say? Or, what would this look like tomorrow? It's a small move, but it changes the whole picture.
And that's why it worked so well with the 3-angle exercise. You weren't just stuck in one emotional zoom level. You step back.
Then we had default mode, and this one is sneaky. We used it to describe the brain's automatic setting, the one that kicks in when you're not paying attention.
So if you keep grabbing your phone without thinking, or saying, I'll start later before you even notice it, that's your default mode doing its thing.
Exactly. And it's useful to say because it makes the pattern feel less personal. It's not, I'm broken. It's my default mode is strong.
That's a big difference. One sounds like a verdict. The other sounds like something you can observe and work with.
And that's where rewire enters the picture. In the story, we used it for the slow process of building a new path in the brain.
I like that word because it sounds technical, but in everyday English, it can be very human. You can rewire a habit, a reaction, even a whole way of responding.
Yes, and you don't have to imagine a giant makeover. A better sentence is, I'm trying to rewire how I respond when I feel behind.
That's a much calmer sentence than I'm becoming a brand new person by Tuesday.
Absolutely. And finally, we use break the pattern for the moment you interrupt the loop on purpose.
That one has energy. It doesn't mean everything changes forever in 1 second. It means you interrupt the automatic thing, even for a moment.
Like taking a different route home, writing the first sentence badly on purpose, or pausing before you say yes to everything. Tiny actions can break the pattern before the pattern takes over.
And that's the real beauty here. You don't need a perfect life overhaul. You need enough awareness to notice the loop and enough courage to step out of it once.
Then again, once is how change starts.
And if you hear these words in a movie, a meeting, or your own head, they'll feel much more natural now.
Exactly. So keep these 5 close, stuck in a rut, shift your perspective, default mode, rewire, and break the pattern.
And remember, they're not just vocabulary. They're a way to describe what your brain is doing and what you can do back.
That's the whole point. So, here's the big takeaway. If you keep trying to change and sliding back, it doesn't automatically mean you're failing. It usually means your brain is protecting the familiar path.
And once you see that, everything gets a little less personal and a lot more workable. You're not fighting your character. You're working with your wiring.
Try this week's first move. Notice one moment when you go on autopilot. Just notice it. Don't fix it yet. That tiny pause already starts to loosen the grip.
Then pick one small discomfort on purpose, a different route, a different order, a different way of starting a task. Keep it small enough that your brain doesn't panic, but real enough that it notices.
And if you feel yourself getting frustrated, that's okay. Frustration doesn't mean stop. It often means you're close to a new pattern which is uncomfortable, right before it becomes normal.
I've seen that in my own life, honestly. The biggest change for me was not a huge breakthrough. It was a boring little decision. I stopped waiting to feel ready before I started. That one shift changed a lot.
I love that because so much of growth is quiet. It's not a movie scene. It's a series of tiny choices that slowly teach your brain a new route.
Before you go, we want to hear from you. Tell us in the comments what's one small change you can try this week to break your usual pattern.
We read every single comment and we really do love hearing your stories. Keep using these phrases, keep noticing your default mode, and keep giving your brain new material to work with.
Thanks for listening, and if this episode helped you feel a little less stuck, share it with someone who needs that reminder too.
Next time, we'll dig into another everyday English topic that turns a confusing mental habit into something simple and useful.
Until then, be gentle with yourself and stay curious.